Okay, let's take a look now at the brain and the parts of the brain. And we've discussed one of them. We are already, in the previous segment, referred to that part of the brain in the frontal lobe called the prefrontal cortex. And if you recall, executive functions such as problem solving, maintaining attention, and inhibiting emotional impulse is generated from that section of the brain. Basically, it's the area that controls much of the behavior that separates us from other animals. But the prefrontal cortex is probably the newest addition to the brain from an evolutionary perspective. There are, in some respects, three separate sections of our brain that work together and are responsible for various different parts of our functioning. The most ancient, basic core neural structure is called the brain stem. And John Medina, the author of Brain Rules, he describes this as the lizard brain, and probably because the functionality of that brain stem is much like and in the same way as the large Gila monster, a type of lizard that has similar functionality. The brain stem controls most of our body's housekeeping chores. We can breathe because of it. Our heart keeps pumping because of it, whether we're awake or asleep. But regardless if we're asleep or not, the neurons in this area are always buzzing and always functioning, obviously, to keep us alive. So sitting on top of the brainstem is the mammalian brain, and it's called the mammalian brain because in many ways it resembles the kind of brain that we see in many mammals, like cats, for example. And really, this part of the brain has got more to do with your basic survival than the potential that exists in each one of us beyond the basic functions. So the basic functions that many researchers describe from this part of the brain include the four F's: fighting, feeding, fleeing, and, let's just call it reproductive behavior. And there are parts of the mammalian brain that each are responsible for different segments of that. But one of the parts, for example, is the amygdala. The amygdala is about emotion. It helps us feel rage or fear or pleasure. It also helps us recall the past experiences of those emotions. So basically, the amygdala is responsible for both the creation of emotions and the memories that they generate. The hippocampus converts short-term memories into longer-term forms, and the thalamus, which is one of the most active and well-connected parts of the brain, it's essentially a control tower for the senses, is also part of the mammalian brain. The thalamus sits squarely on top of the center of your brain and processes and routes signals sent from nearly every corner of your sensory universe. Now, folded on top of all of that is something called the cortex. It's sometimes referred to as the human brain. It's what distinguishes us from other mammals and makes us uniquely human and gives us the advantage that we have. This folded up, layered part of the brain, if it was spread out, would have about the thickness of heavy-duty cardboard and about the size of a baby blanket. It has deep electrical communications with the inside of the brain. In this area, the neurons, they spark to life, blink off, and then suddenly fire again, and complex patterns and circuits of electrical information crackle in coordinated, repeated patterns. They race to communicate their information along these large neural highways that branch suddenly into thousands of exits throughout the brain.
Created using Powtoon.